All right, so today we're going to talk about the 101st poem of Catullus, which is found on page 154 of your textbook. And so we sort of started our poetry unit talking about narrative poetry, and now we're going to transition to a different kind of poem, a different type of poem, and actually different types, plural. One would be what's meant by an elegy or elegiac poem, and then the other would be an ode. We'll talk more about odes when we talk about Horace. You are going to read a poem of Horace that's found on page 155, and you'll recognize a very famous phrase from that poem right at the very end. But what do we mean by elegy or elegiac? Well, elegy and elegiac poetry over the last, 400 years or so has come to mean writing a poem in memory of somebody who has died. And that is true that this poem here, this Catullus 101 poem, is certainly also about that. It's about the death of his brother. However, okay, sorry about that delay. My daughter started crying. Hey, I do these after she goes to sleep. So, getting back to it, elegies, though, or elegiac poetry in terms of the Romans, really the themes could be anything. It didn't necessarily have to be about death. In fact, many of them were actually about love and falling in love with somebody else. Sort of lighter themes, and we're going to see lots of poems that are written in what's called elegiac meter or elegiac couplets that were written by Catullus, and they all deal with love, and those will start with the next one that we read, Catullus number 51. How do you recognize elegiac couplets, by the way? Well, you can see it here. The second line is always indented, and that's about it. And I'll teach you how to scan poetry a little bit later on when I return. So let's just dive into it. Multas per gentes et multa per aequora vectus ad venio has miseras frater ad inferias ut te postremo donare munere mortis et mutam nequiquam ad loquere cenerem. Again, we always want to start with reading it in Latin. Let's do it one more time. Looking particularly at the endings of the words, if you see any prepositional phrases that jump out at you, if you see any words that indicate the beginning of a clause, if you can tell by chance who the subject is or where the main verb is, that's always great too. So, keeping that in mind, read it with me one more time. Multas per gentes et multa per aequora vectus ad venio has miseras frater ad inferias ut te postremo donare munere mortis et mutam nequiquam ad loquere cenerem. Okay, so looking at it, probably what gets our attention almost immediately are the fact that there are two prepositional phrases in the first line. And here is, one of them. Sorry about the color. That was not what I intended. Clear that. And, okay. One is right here with multas per gentes. And where do we see another one? Right here. Multa per aequora. Okay. Moving on. Do we see any other prepositional phrases? Well, I see one in the second line, ad inferias. And is there a word earlier, or words plural earlier in this second line that also are accusative plural? And we can use the old looky-likey rule here, has and miseras. All of those words are words that modify or are part of this prepositional phrase, modifying the noun inferias. Okay, do we see a clause anywhere? Well, this jumps out at us because it has ut. And where does it end? It ends at the end of the sentence, using punctuation, of course, to help us out. But we also know that ut is usually followed by a subjunctive verb, and we happen to see two subjunctive verbs inside that clause. And I'm sure that you can see them. One is, not the right color. Let's try that. One is donarem, that's right, and the other is ad loquerer. So those are both subjunctive, imperfect tense subjunctive verbs. They are the infinitive followed by a present tense ending. So inside the clause, we've identified, bam, our verbs. Now going back to the main thrust of the sentence, the independent thought, which would be the first two lines. Do we have a verb anywhere? Well, we've already identified that there are three prepositional phrases, and so that leaves us with et, vectus, advenio, and frater. And I'm sure most of you can see that out of those four words, the word advenio would happen to be the verb. So that's the main verb of the entire sentence. Which then, oh my gosh, Latin's all about the ending. So advenio, look at the ending of it. Oh means I. So the subject of the entire sentence is I. So, wow, we have learned quite a lot. And have we translated it one bit? The answer is no, we have not. It's very important to do this before you start diving in. Okay, so now we're going to start with the first two lines. And what are the other words that we have left sort of unaccounted? Et, well, we know that that just means and it seems to be joining these two prepositional phrases. Now, what about this word vectus? This is interesting. It comes from a verb, veho, vehere, vexi, vectus. So therefore, it's the fourth part of the verb. And the fourth part of the verb, if you will recall, is the perfect passive participle. Looks like a verb in the front, noun in the back. And look at it, it has a US ending. So what kind of nouns have US endings? That would be masculine, singular, nominative. So therefore, it's describing the subject of the sentence. And we already know who the subject of the sentence is. The subject of the sentence happens to be I. So there you go. Vectus is going to be describing I. Now, how are perfect passive participles translated? Having been verbed. So we'll get to the meaning of vectus in just a second. And then finally, the only other word in the first two lines that's unaccounted for is frater, right there. And you can tell by the punctuation that this is the addressee. In other words, I, the speaker of the poem, I, is talking to his frater, his brother. Frater here is in the vocative case. So now, using the vocab glasses on page 154 to help you out, we can actually translate this. Vectus, having been carried through many races or nations or tribes, however you want to translate gentes, and through many seas or oceans, I advenio, that means arrive. I arrive, O brother, at these wretched tributes to the dead. Oh, wow. So what does this tell us? Think about it. Having been carried through many tribes and through many seas, I arrive, O brother, at these wretched tributes to the dead. Tells us quite a number of things, actually. And then we have this clause here. It's a purpose clause. Why did I do this? So that, or in order to, donarem, subject of donarem would be I. You can tell that by the M at the end. Now looking at these words here, te postremo donare munere mortis et mutam nequiquam cenerem. Well, taking it word by word, we have te. Now that looks either accusative or ablative form of the pronoun that means you. Now postremo ends in an O. That could be either dative or ablative. Munere, that comes from munus muneris. And so telling you that, it's a third declension noun. And where do you see E in third declension nouns? The last case is the ablative A, O, E, isisibus. So we could probably, I can't remember what color I picked for ablative. It might have been this. I think that these words right here, we can safely say, these are ablative. Post-remo is an adjective describing this ablative noun. Mortis, mors mortis, that looks genitive singular to me. And then moving on, mutam nequiquam cenerem. Nequiquam is, according to your gloss there, you see it means in vain. That's an adverb. But mutam is an adjective, and cenerem, meaning ash, is, of course, a noun. So, what do we have here? We seem to have an accusative direct object, perhaps, and that would be mutam and cenerem seem to be linked here together. So I'm going to draw a line. Oh my lord, that's not good. Okay, go with it. All right, so having been carried through many tribes and through many seas, I, O brother, arrive at these wretched tributes to the dead in order to give you, or to present you, something like that, postremo munere, in this last gift of death, and in order to adloquere, to address your silent ash in vain. Oh, wow. Sad. Okay. So that I might present or give you, in other words, like give you gifts, sort of gifts I think would be implied, give you these, or to present to you, to show you in this last gift of death, and in this final gift of death, and to address your silent ash in vain. So that tells us why Catullus has made this journey, to see his brothers, basically his tombstone. So moving on to the next part. Quando quidem fortuna mihi tete abstulit ipsum, heu miser indigne frater adempte mihi, nunc tamen interia haec, prisco quae more parentum tradita sunt triste munere ad inverias, accipe fraterno multam mananti affletu, atque in perpetuum frater ave atque vale. Very famous phrase there, ave atque vale, is how he ends this very sad poem. So that's all one really long sentence, but don't despair, we can do it, and we're going to read it again. Quando quidem fortuna mihi tete abstulit ipsum, heu miser indigne frater adempte mihi, nunc tamen interia haec, prisco quae more parentum tradita sunt triste munere ad inverias, accipe fraterno multam mananti affletu, atque in perpetuum frater ave atque vale. By the way, I'm not reading, although these poems are certainly written in meter, I am not reading them in their true meter. That's because you don't know it yet, but you will. And when you do, we'll start to read them in the meter itself. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, geez, do we see any clauses? How about we start there? I'm going to give you a big hint, because you don't know what this word means. Quando quidem means seeing that, or sense, and that seems to, that seems to start a clause off for us here. So, since, hey, where does it end? Do we see a verb? There's a verb, abstulit, and we're going to use our punctuation to help us out here. I'm going to assume that the clause ends here. Inside this clause, do we see a verb? Well, we just mentioned it, of course. That would be abstulit. It is right here. Okay. And do we see a subject, a word that looks nominative? And the answer is yes, we do. Right here, fortuna. Oops. There we go. Fortuna, fortune. Okay. And te, you've probably never seen that before. Te just means you, and it's the either accusative or ablative form. Te is just sort of emphatic, like you. Is there a word that describes tete? It would be ipsum. Ipsum describes tete. So these two words here are linked together. They are both accusative. They would be the direct object of obstulet. So just in this little clause, we've already marked out our subject, our verb, our direct object. I'd say we're going fairly well so far. Moving along. What do you notice about this next line? Heu means, something like, alas, miser indigne frater adempte mihi. Once again, we have a vocative here, and he addresses his brother, calls him frater, and then there are two vocative words here that describe him, adempte and indigne. Now, I don't really have a good way of illustrating that because we haven't picked a color per se for vocative, but hey, I'm just going to draw something like that. So, moving on. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. I made a mistake. My bad. Hey, nobody's perfect, right? I am going to erase the last couple. There we go. Indigne is actually an adverb. Now, adempte, however, that certainly is vocative, and that is modifying frater, as is the word miser. That's what I meant to say. Okay, going on. Your book gives you a big hint. If you look on page 154, there are a pair of asterisks, one next to hike and the other next to accipe, and it says that those two words are linked together. That's a huge clue in trying to figure this out. Accipe, as you know, is a verb, comes from accipio. Now, what is a verb that ends in e? That is a vocative. So that happens to be actually the one of the main verbs of this entire sentence, this very long sentence, accipe. And what does accipe mean? It means accept or receive. Now, why does hike go with it? It's the direct object. Accept these things. Okay? Now, do we see a clause somewhere in here? You probably see it. You see the word quae, and we're just going to back up a little bit to prisco and start the clause here. And where are we going to end it? Again, use punctuation. It's your friend. We're going to end it there at inferias. What's quae describing? I'll go ahead and tell you. It's describing hike. It's describing these things. Now let's start with the words inside the clause. We have prisco, more. Are those the same case? The last case is the ablative A-O-E. They sure are. Those are both ablative. And I've already forgotten what my ablative color is, so let's just pretend like whatever color I'm highlighting it right now is ablative. Dun dun dun. Prisco describes more. Okay. Now we have the word parentum, so something about parents, maybe. What is the verb inside this clause? Well, we're coming up to it right here. Tradita sunt. That is the main verb of the clause, not of the sentence, but of the clause. Now we have tristi munere. Tristi munere. Munere, as you know from the previous slide, earlier in the poem, is ablative. Tristi is actually also ablative, and you're probably thinking, but wait a minute, Mr. Allen, the last case is the ablative A-O-E, is the sebus. Shouldn't tristis have an E at the end? Just know that there are some, I'm not going to get into it ever with you because it's too confusing, there are some third declension adjectives, and nouns for that matter, that end in the letter I in the ablative singular as opposed to E. Tristis is one of them, and you'll get really good about recognizing them. So both of these words are ablative, so I'll mark those, our trusty ablative color here. And then, of course, ad inferias, we have a prepositional phrase. And I meant to underline that in black. Oh well, too late. Okay, moving on. Accipe, we know what that is. That's the main verb of the entire sentence, or at least one of them. Fraterno multum manantia fletu. So multum manantia is an idiom in Latin, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you that it is actually really going all the way back up here to hike. Okay? Those two words there are describing hike. Okay? Now that leaves us fraterno and fletu. Ooh, those happen to be ablative. Fletu is a fourth declension noun, and those are both ablative, singular, fraterno, fletu. Lots of ablatives in this slide. And then finally, in the last bit, do we have any other things? Well, in perpetuum, that seems like a prepositional phrase to me. So I'm going to underline that. And then we have frater, sitting out there by itself, probably vocative again, which it is. And then we do have two more commands, which therefore would be main verbs of the sentence. And those are awe and wale. Okay. So now, using your glosses, finally we're going to look at the vocabulary, and we can go back and say this. Since fortune has taken, or literally has stolen, in a sense, has stolen you yourself from me, alas, O wretched brother, having been taken away unfairly from me. Now, however, or nevertheless, meanwhile, accept these things which, traditas sunt, have been passed down by the old custom or ancient custom of our ancestors as a sad gift to tributes to the dead. Accept these things multum manantia, drenched, that's an idiom that means drenched, drenched with brotherly tears or weeping. And, O brother, hail and farewell forever. Oh, quite sad. I want you to journal about that. Okay, see you next time.